Hey there, Internet. My name is Luxander, and as you can see from the title of the video, I'm going to be sharing an opinion with you today that I think some people will probably misinterpret, so I want to clarify my statements and elaborate on what my opinion is and what I mean when I say certain things. My most recent video, as of recording this one, is my response video to Arielle Scarcella, and one of the things that I said in that video, some people need clarification on. I would like to make sure my opinion is clear, just addressing those comments so that people don't think that I don't believe things that I don't believe, you know? In the video about Arielle Scarcella, I postulated that, from my perspective, there is a substantial difference between a gender non-conforming cis person and a non-binary person, whatever their gender expression is, and I said that the difference is that there's something happening in their brain. I know that some people hear this and think, oh, you think trans people have to have brain scans in order to get transition treatment. Not the case. I'm not sure if you know this about me, but I am an atheist. I don't believe in souls or spirits or anything like that. I'm a pretty strict materialist in that regard. That's sort of my foundation that I think is really important to understand. I believe that consciousness itself, everything about the ability to conceptualize the self, is an extant thing that exists because of how complicated our brains are. Consciousness doesn't exist outside of the material brain. The electrical signals happening in your brain and the level to which we've had to develop social interactions for survival reasons. Consciousness is a biological function of the brain. So starting from that position, then it will flow that everything that happens in your consciousness is also coming from your physical biological brain. The comparison that I've been using lately is your favorite ice cream flavor, because I think that that is something people can understand as, like, you don't really choose what your favorite ice cream flavor is or what your least favorite ice cream flavor is. It's most likely like a complex interaction of different things in your brain. And, you know, you might be able to put someone in a machine that scans their brain and sees what parts light up while they're eating their favorite ice cream, right? And you might be able to see, like, certain pleasure centers of their brain light up in response to that. As far as trying to locate whatever it is inside your brain that makes you like one flavor of ice cream over another, it's too complicated. It's not possible to find it. That is my opinion, is that something on that level of complexity, not possible to find it. You know, it's not the same as saying, oh, there's a fear response. Where does fear live in the brain? Favorite ice cream flavor lives in probably multiple places in your brain. You wouldn't be able to isolate any one of them. I believe that being trans, being non-binary, like having whatever brain difference that is functionally the same. You may be able to say, like, oh, I see when this person is gendered correctly that the pleasure centers of their brain light up. But that's not the same as being like, ah, yeah, this part right here is the trans part. I know some people get freaked out by the idea that there is one trans part of your brain, because that would really easily lead into conversion therapy. I don't support conversion therapy. I think it's super awful on so many levels. And like, I don't think that it's possible. There is no gay gene, there is no trans gene, there is no gay part of the brain, and there's no, like, trans part of the brain. But that doesn't mean that it's not still coming from somewhere physical, and that is just a normal thing about being a human person, that everything about who you are comes from somewhere in your biological brain. I will just briefly touch on the brain scans thing. There has been some evidence that seems to indicate that, for example, a trans woman on hormones may have certain parts of her brain that are closer to the same size as a cisgender woman's, closer to the cisgender woman than the cisgender man size of their brain parts. Those are really interesting things. I would be fascinated to see what we think we can learn from that, but I don't think that any of that information is conclusive enough. And like I said, I'm not trying to isolate the thing in the brain. I don't think it's important to do that. I don't think it's possible to do that. I think if you did do that, you'd be opening up a lot of unpleasant doors. An additional reason why I think that gender incongruence, gender dysphoria, whatever, I think that that comes from your physical brain. There is a hypothesis. This is a hypothesis. This has not been confirmed, I don't think, in any way. This is just like an idea that's popularized within the community. Again, no scientific basis per se, but I think that it has a lot of credence, and that is this idea that being trans is a thing that happens because of your exposure to hormones while you're being gestated by your parent, like while your parent is pregnant with you. The general idea is that a person's genitals and gonads develop pretty early in the pregnancy. The brain part happens towards the end of the pregnancy. So hypothetically, if you received a not corresponding exposure of hormones while your brain was developing, that you may end up with a brain body map distinction, where there's incongruence there, because this idea is that your brain kind of develops a sense of your sex at a different time than your body phenotypically develops, physiologically, externally develops sexual characteristics. I will say that I think that gender is a complex mixture of social and internal factors, social and biological factors, but I don't think that gender is wholly socially constructed, because of the fact that people who have a sense of body dysphoria have that sense of body dysphoria whether or not they're around other people. I'm a person who wants bottom surgery because I want bottom surgery, because I know that my body would feel whole and complete in a way that it kind of just doesn't right now. I have no social explanation for that. I don't think you can excise it. I think that there is something more akin to a brain-body map disconnect. So basically, in a way, I would say that being trans, if we were to really look into it, could technically be considered an intersex condition if you could prove that it has to do with the way you were born and your exposure in utero, right? Again, I don't necessarily know that there is a way to quantifiably say that, and I understand that people who are explicitly intersex, as the way we currently understand it, experience a lot more bodily autonomy violations, being coercively assigned into a gender, all of those things have an elevated degree of trauma involved with them. And I'm not trying to insert myself into that narrative. This is just me saying, this is the most reasonable explanation that I can think of. Hey there, Editing Lux just popping in really fast. I wanted to point out that I don't feel a need to have a justification or a reason for why trans people are the way that they are. I don't think that we need to justify this to people. I'm just a very curious, analytical person who wants to be able to understand why things happen the way they happen. And that's it. I just wanted to tell you that. If everything that happens in your thoughts is coming from your brain, which they have to, you don't continue to think after you are dead. Your consciousness doesn't go anywhere. It just ceases to function, like turning the power off on your computer. Then it would flow naturally that there is something physical in your brain that indicates that you are going to have a different gender than the one that you were expected to. And there are probably physical reasons for that. Very likely there are physical reasons for that. I don't really think it's purely esoteric. Now, I will also say, this discussion has been kind of coming up lately about could you choose to be trans? I will say that probably most folks who identify as trans now didn't just think, oh, I think it would be cool to be trans. I have developed my thinking on this a little bit, and I actually do think that the optimal goal for our movement would be, and the natural conclusion of it would be, being trans is not a bad thing. Therefore, you could choose to be trans, and that would not be a problem. I do think that for a lot of people, it is this physical thing, and that there are a lot of complicated social pressures that go into it. I'm never going to argue for pure nature, pure nurture. Those things do weave together a bit. I know that I'm making a lot of biological argumentation in this video, but yeah, what I'm saying is that my position is that optimally, that is the goal we should be going towards, is that being trans is so normalized that you could just choose to be, and that would be not a problem. There is still an argument to be made. Riley Grace did a debate recently, and a lot of content following the debate with this other streamer, Demon Mama, who I'm not really familiar with. There was a lot that went into this debate, right? I'm bringing it up because I think that Riley is making essentially the same point that I am, which is the premise of their discussion was that argumentatively and logically, it doesn't really work to define a woman as just anyone who identifies as a woman. And Riley was making this argument, and I don't know if it came across this way to people. And Riley, if you're watching this, please let me know if I have misinterpreted you. I think I understand where you're coming from, is that there is something that is going on before you identify as a different gender. The idea here that Riley was putting forth is that it's not the identifying as a woman that is the operative thing that makes you trans. There is some urge or notion somewhere on a deeper level in your brain that would even allow you to have the thought of identifying with a different gender than the one that you were assigned. Hypothetically, even on an argumentation that, like, yeah, you can choose to be trans, you could still say there is something that motivated you to do that you could probably say is in your brain based on, again, the underlying premise that I've laid out, which is that your brain is where your consciousness comes from. And I don't think that that's a controversial opinion to have, particularly if you emphasize brain scans are not part of the diagnosis process. We don't involve any attempt to look at the brain. Like, it's like depression, and like this, the comparison to mental health is always a little bit iffy, but what I'm trying to say here, you can take a brain scan of someone who is experiencing depression, and their brain will look different. The gray matter tends to be a little bit shrunken and like darker a bit, but you don't diagnose someone with depression by doing that. You don't look at their brain and go like, yeah, this part of your brain is acting weird, let's put you on antidepressants. You talk to the person, because with any phenomenon that's happening in the brain, whether that's like situational depression, whether that's MDD, whether you're having some anxiety because you're about to get married, like a normal situation, all of those things are only possible to diagnose by talking to the person. This is how we do science for psychology, basically. Like there are certain things that you do, like, yeah, you do a brain scan, you find out if there's a brain tumor, right? But when it comes to how the things in your brain affect your psychological state of being and your consciousness, you can only figure those things out by having conversations and by trusting that people have an accurate understanding of what's going on in their own internal life, right? So yeah, I don't really think, my opinion taken holistically, assuming that you've listened to everything that I've said so far, I don't think this is super controversial, and I hope that I have not upset anyone by just basically stating what I think is pretty objective about the way that the body works. Your consciousness is just like an errant, mistaken, accidental side effect of having a brain that's complicated because our species evolved to survive via social interaction. That has particularly driven the evolution of our brains to get to this level of complexity where smiling is biologically hardwired. Like, that's another thing. I don't know, like, maybe people who are hearing me talk, like, don't necessarily have all the background information that I do, but there are emotional things that you think of as being like, oh, it's just your feelings, take care of it. But those are hardwired. Smiling is the same across the entire human species. Crying is the same across the entire human species. These are not culturally relevant. There's different cultural applications. There's different times when it's appropriate culturally to cry or something like that. Or, smiling with your teeth versus not smiling with your teeth, whatever. There are a lot, like, some cultural factors that go into it. Again, everything is a little bit of both. When it comes to like how a baby behaves, the baby cries when it needs something. The baby laughs and smiles when it's happy. Those are biological. I'm basically just trying to offer the idea that, similarly to how your feelings have a biological purpose, that basically your feeling about your gender is also biological to a degree, to some degree. I think I'm gonna go ahead and wrap up there. I think those are all my thoughts on this. I hope that you found this elucidating. I hope that I've made myself clear enough that no one thinks that I have any intentions to misapply this theory, this hypothesis, to anyone else. I still think that self-determination is the thing that matters when you are being given validation for your gender. Brain scans are never going to be part of the diagnostic process, and just to reiterate, if we got to a point where people were wanting to choose to be trans, and like there probably are, that is acceptable, and I don't think any of this has been contradictory, and you can tell me if any of this is contradictory. I don't think it is at all contradictory to say this probably exists in your brain and there's no fucking way we're gonna find it, because that's how the human brain is. There's a lot going on in there, and I don't think it's possible to pinpoint the trans thing in your brain or anything like that. So that's gonna be all for me today. If you like the video, please give me pretty analytics to look at and comments to read. You can subscribe, you can ring the bell because I'm not on any kind of schedule. You can also tip me on PayPal or become a subscriber on Patreon if you want to. And I hope you have an okay day. Bye. As always, thank you so much to all of my patrons, especially in this month of March, which is my birthday month. Especially wanted to shout out Sean, Eris, R. Halverson, Frozen Summers, Michelle Winter, Suzanne Maynard, Sarah A., Wellington Marcus, Amanda B., Mayor Treebeard, Athiette, Elizabeth Bartell, Mr. Atheist, and Annalise Friend.